Okay, welcome everybody. This is the BCH Ignite live stream for September 11th, 2020. We're talking about Bitcoin Cash governance. So joining me, Emergent Reasons, Colin Enstad, Justin Bonds, Kieran Mesquita, Roger Veer, Eleanor Blank, Josh Green, Javier Gonzalez, Fernando Pelliccioni. Thank you so much, everybody, for being here. Awesome.
Thank you, George.
Okay. So I'm going to try, at least in the beginning, to kind of throw out questions, and then let's try to keep it going pretty fast. So question number one, does Bitcoin Cash need governance? Justin, what do you think?
So, so I think that every cryptocurrency has a form of governance, whether we like it or not. And I think if we ignore that, then there's a greater risk of a system being captured or perverted. So I think we're better off bringing that understanding into the light, and that reduces the risk of governance actually occurring in the shadows.
Roger, agree, disagree?
One form of governance is that the protocol is locked down and doesn't ever change ever. And then another one is that you have one dictator can say, okay, you guys are going to pay me 8% and I'm going to do what I want with it. Or there's a bunch of levels in between. So which level of governance? I guess that's what we're going to talk about today. So.
Josh, do you think Bitcoin Cash needs governance?
I mean, I think we have it regardless of whether or not we admit it or not, and I think it's just a matter of putting some semblance of structure around it, or if we just want to do what we're doing currently every 6 months or whenever someone wants to do it, which is kind of just chaotic. It works, but it's not always the easiest.
So, John, what is BCH missing today that something like governance might solve, do you think?
Right. So, yeah, it's kind of the problem statement, right? Making sure that we know what are we talking about when we talk about governance, because I think it's very likely that probably everybody in this room has a different idea on what it even means, right? So for me, I think it boils down to really one clear thing that we should talk about governance around, and then other things should probably be left to individuals and organizations to decide by themselves. I think where it applies, where something needs to be solved, is decision-making around the commons, right? So we have commons in BCH like consensus layer, payment protocols, anything that affects across the board, that affects people directly on the network. And those kind of things, right? When you don't have a coercive decision maker like a dictator or a parliament that tells you the laws, right? You need a way to figure out how to do that, how to maintain those commons without somebody telling you what to do. So I think that's the hard problem we have to solve.
Eleanor, do you have any thoughts on that?
I was just thinking of The Tragedy of the Commons by Eleanor, what's her name? Ozorb, I think. And in BCH right now, what we see is a fiasco. We are a joke, and it's really painful on the community side. And we need to do something. I'm not sure what. I'm happy that we're all here tonight to discuss it. I think we all know that the cat is out of the box. And right now we're kind of held hostage by a lead implementation. And I think that we're seeing the community organizing itself to actually take that power back. So it's reassuring to see that we still have balancing mechanisms, even though we don't have a structure for it. So in a voluntarist approach, I think we're doing something good here. But we'll see on the 15th of November. And I think there's a lot at play. And this fork, sadly, or upgrade, we have PTSD from previous splits, and it's about keeping us together right now. I think there's a strong will to keep the community together. And in my mind, an upgrade or a fork, it's all about the narrative that we spin around it. And this one can become just an irrelevant split. It's not a community split like we've had in the past. So that reassures me. That's my 2 cents for now.
Awesome. How do you guys think? So, it sounds like there is at least a little bit of consensus maybe around this idea that, we do kind of have sort of governance, like market-based, like you do your thing and I'm going to do my thing, and let's see, how that can work together maybe. But and I think Roger's made kind of that point probably better than I just did many times. But how can we explain BCH governance to outsiders, to people who are used to something like, an IOTA Foundation or, the Zcash electric coin company thing? How can we explain that? Colin, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah. So as far as like overall governance goes in Bitcoin Cash, it's interesting because, there is no clear structure, obviously. And so it's like we work together or we split. And I think really that's like the simplest way to explain the governance model. It's like you either work together or you have two different coins. And I think that's kind of been Bitcoin. That's been Bitcoin for its whole period. And finally, a fork actually happened in 2017, Bitcoin Cash. And that's always kind of been the governance model. And I think people have just always been so scared of a hard fork and a split. And like, it's sad. It's kind of like the nuclear button, but I think just that's the model. And I think, yeah, it can be improved how to like reach this consensus actually. And miner signaling is one of the things that help. Miner signaling has been happening in Bitcoin since 2012. Actually, I learned just yesterday. So that's a way to help. And I'm sure Jader's got a bunch of stuff to talk about that. But yeah, I think that's really it. It's you work together or you split. So,
John, I see your hand is up. Sorry, I just noticed that now. Did you want to jump in?
Yeah, I would. Sorry. Yeah, I would. So I think it's important to say, right, that how do we explain it to people? That's tough because, like Eleanor was saying, we're kind of a joke, but I think it's really the opposite of that. I think it's that we're one of the few cryptocurrencies that's actually wrestling with these issues. I think a lot of them are kind of on autopilot and kind of taking the easy route, and we're definitely not taking the easy route. So to explain what it is, we have to figure out what we're actually doing. And what Colin said is, what we have right now, which is, in the absence of a dictator, which we are kind of in the process of establishing, you have to figure out a way to come to a decision on the commons without waiting until the 11th hour and miners doing something at the very end, right? So that's just not going to work. It's not predictable enough. So it's hard to explain when we haven't quite figured it out yet. And I think that's the job that we have, is to figure out how to make these decisions on the commons predictable and still stay independent of those coercive decision makers like dictators or foundations or whatever, Congress or that kind of thing. So we have to figure it out first before we can explain it. And we definitely don't want to say, oh, we just do the split thing. That's it. Yeah, we do need to get better.
So if I may speak to that.
Go for it.
So actually, I agree with Colin that, the splitting mechanism is one aspect of how we've done governance. And, I also agree with John in terms of, what we need to do. So I've been developing, a theory on Bitcoin governance, and so have we. Our theories differ a bit, but in that I think it's important. I will actually be releasing my paper on governance this weekend, because at least the first revision of it, because I don't want to delay it anymore. But I think when we look at the splitting mechanism as part of our governance mechanism, that's actually the final mechanism in a whole line of other processes. And I think we can do a better job of defining and understanding and coming to a greater consensus around understanding governance. Because I think if we understand governance better, because I think we have it right in front of our eyes, we just don't understand it. And by not understanding it, a lot of perversion actually occurs. So at least according to my theory of governance, there's three stages, three key stages of decision making. And the first stage is the implementations or the clients. And we're seeing that now. And there needs to, and I think one of the things really lacking is there needs to be a better understanding and a culture of having multiple implementations in order to avoid these crises to occur. Because if the first stage of governance effectively becomes captured, it essentially corrupts all of the different stages of decision making further down the line. And we've seen that in BTC, and we see it occurring in BCH as well, causing different forms of technological stagnation. So in terms of my framework of governance, and this is the proposal that I'm putting forward, at least how to understand it from a political, philosophical perspective. And Javier also has his own theory, which is very similar to mine as well, is that we have these distinct phases of decision making, be it from the implementations to the miners being a key decision-making process, to the market through the splitting mechanism, but that really being the nuclear option. I think the real magic Goldilocks zone we need to hit is that we don't split too often and we don't split too much, because that creates a more competitive cryptocurrency. And I think if we don't get these ingredients just right, it will lead to the chain continuously splitting over these power struggles that occur on the implementation layer of governance.
So Roger, I saw you have your hand up.
Yeah, it's about a past subject, but I think it was Eleanor said that, you know, that this looks like a joke and it's a big problem, and like, yeah, there's certainly problems at the moment, but I think from a marketing perspective, we really need to put out a good face here. And the good face here is that Bitcoin Cash is the third, the third most popular proof of work cryptocurrency in the entire world. So there's Bitcoin, there's Ethereum, and Bitcoin Cash is number 3. Everything else out there with some other, you know, higher market cap than Bitcoin Cash is a token or some other non-proof of work chain. So in terms of like proof of work chain with a, you know, fair right out of the gate, the distribution, and anybody could mine it, Bitcoin Cash is the third most popular in the entire world. And that's a really, really big deal. I think we need to put that face forward there. And I think it's something that's worth arguing over. The fact that we're all here spending our time talking about it means that this is something that's important, and we shouldn't let it get hijacked the same way that that Bitcoin was. And I think, you know, I think it's Javier Gonzalez has a plan there that I would love to hear about in detail. I know he's been messaging myself and a number of other people about the BMP. Maybe now is the time to hear about it. And I apologize for never having looked into it more. And then I saw Jonathan Tuman join too. Like every time that guy opens his mouth, I feel like I learned something. So I'd love to hear from both of those guys today.
Yeah, so welcome, Jonathan. Welcome, Mark. I think Mark Lamb is with us now, and Christian of Bitcoin Cast. And yeah, so let's jump in to the next question. How can the Bitcoin mining parliament help with Bitcoin Cash governance? And I'll turn that over to Javier for a short answer. And Javier, si quieres puedes hablar en español y yo te traduzco, pero dame tiempo para traducir.
Hello, everybody. First of all, I am learning English, but I want to try to talk in English. If you understand me, I want to try my best. Okay.
100%.
Okay. Thank you. Okay. To the first question, Bitcoin Cash needs governance. I think yes. The next block has specific rules, and that requires a decision mechanism. This is a decision making, yes or yes, and this is politics. And the last sentence of the white paper talk about any needed rules, and then we jump to the next logical question: is who decides? In my investigation of Bitcoin, I get to that point and I study that point. Okay, and I think we are we are trapped in a cyclic split situation. To talk clear, BTC are captured by a company, Blockstream, in my opinion. And BSB are captured too by a company and chain. In my opinion, I think it's obvious for me. And we are here in Bitcoin Cash. We have risk to the same thing happens again for a company to capture the blockchain. And this is ABC. Okay. In my opinion, it's the same problem, the same root problem all the time. Developers with power, that is the problem in my opinion. But we are lucky. I think we are lucky because we have the white paper. And the white paper, in my opinion, is all the time, all the white paper is talking all the time about a hash power voting system. They vote miners with hash power. The white paper, in my opinion, is a voting system, is the most secure, open voting system ever built by by humans. And,
Okay.
and it's,
All right.
it's not
Let's let somebody else get a word in though.
okay.
Okay. So Jonathan, I know you haven't had a chance to speak yet, and I know you kind of disagree. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, nice to see you guys. Nice to see everybody. I've got a lot of thoughts on this. One of the issues that we have at hand is what kind of fork or what kind of changes are we voting on? And I think that this is an important question to ask because the answer to that question guides what kind of governance method we should be using. For the kinds of forks that Bitcoin, BTC was using up until SegWit and including SegWit, then yes, I think that actually hash power voting is a fairly reasonable choice for that because those were soft forks, those were miner enforced changes. But for the changes that BCH has been making in its existence generally, the soft forking mechanism is not being used, it's a hard fork. And in that case, the miners are not relevant. The miners don't play a role in how the fork plays out. In a hard forking change, everything is opt-in. Users have to run software intentionally supporting the new features. And that means that when miners follow or don't follow, it doesn't actually make a difference because the chain is never at stake. The chain is never vulnerable to wipeout. So in that case, who's the right set of entities to make decisions? Who's the right quorum for voting on these kinds of issues? And I think that that is actually just the users. I think that the correct quorum, the correct set of people to be voting on these governance mechanisms for Bitcoin Cash and for hard forks is just coin holders. So what I would like to see is actually a movement in that direction. I would like to see a method for getting people to be able to vote either directly or indirectly on the issues for every hard fork protocol upgrade. And I think that that's really the big thing that was lacking in the IFP. There was no vote from stakeholders on whether or not to accept the IFP. And if there was, we kind of know how it would have played out. But the reason that the IFP is as controversial as it is because it's being pushed on people without support of the people who actually hold Bitcoin Cash. So I'd like to offer that as a contrasting model to the BNP, which is a miner's vote. With the miner vote, you have the potential for miners making a decision that users disagree with. And if they do that, then the result is a fork. The result is a hard fork in which users and developers bandy together to oppose the miners. And according to BIP99, according to the lore that Bitcoin Core has been pushing forward since 2013, 2012, the way to do that is with a proof of work change, which we don't really like. That is the nuclear option in Bitcoin governance. And we can avoid that by asking the users and asking the coin holders directly what they want, so that instead of having to have miners guess, we can just measure it.
I think that's pretty cool too. I mean, let's ensure we have good communication from everybody, miners, holders, businesses. Fernando, do you, I don't think you've had a chance to speak yet. Do you want to weigh in on this topic?
Hey guys, how are you? Well, I think maybe the BMP is not a perfect thing, but what we have today is the worst of all possible things. So I think BMP, we have to give BMP a chance. Maybe, I don't know, maybe try for the next year. Or I have many doubts too, but I can give BMP and Javier a try. Sorry about my English too.
Okay, super. John, I saw you had your hand up.
Yes. So I see a lot of ideas that aren't necessarily conflicting, right? Like we want to hear from miners. BMP helps us to hear, a kind of nuanced opinion of miners. Now they have like 5 bytes in the Coinbase that they can use to signal with, right? Like that's our level of communication right now, public communication, and it's not clearly not enough. It's not nuanced, and it has other issues. So yeah, we want to hear from miners, and like you were saying, we want to hear from other parties. We want to hear from businesses. We want to hear from onboarders and just regular users, all kinds of people. But I think something that's very, very important here is for us to really understand what we mean when we say voting. So right now, the BMP, the Bitcoin Miner Parliament, is not voting per se. It's more like polling, getting an opinion. And I think that's great. Like getting the opinion of people before things happen is wonderful. And when somebody else, other people before were saying voting, I also think it's very important to identify that this is also, sharing information. And I think it's critical that we don't let voting turn into coercion. Don't let voting turn into enforcement. Because the white paper does have a very good point that at the end, the miners enforce some set of rules, and they better have good information available to them. And if they're not the ones enforcing the rules, then what we're getting into is a position where we're starting to bypass proof of work. If we start enforcing rules that miners must follow somehow, right, then you're starting to bypass proof of work. And I think that's a very dangerous precedent that we need to avoid. So I just want to make sure that we clarify when we talk about voting, at least my preference is that we're talking about opinions and information and making sure that everyone has good information available and actionable information, and not about enforcing votes.
Excellent point. Thanks. I see a couple people have their hands up, but I want to let Mark Lamb get in here because he hasn't said anything yet.
Yeah, sure. Happy to talk. So I think there's a few outcomes you can have in any blockchain, and one of the most dangerous ones is ossification. Certain parts should probably be ossified. I think like ossification generally refers to like something being fixed. And I think you want stability. You want like, SHA-256, like we shouldn't switch away from that to another proof of work. You want lots of things, 21 million Bitcoins, all these things you want to be stable, but for things that do need to change at times, I think it's important for the voting mechanism to have a cost. Obviously, I'm super biased here because I run a futures exchange that has governance futures on the Bitcoin Cash fork and is generally interested in that. But I think the benefit of two mechanisms: one, futures on a fork or futures on an outcome of a situation, and then two, coin voting. The benefit of both of these outcomes, or both of these kind of mechanisms, is you actually get the people who are the economic majority, or you get people with risk at stake, with either BCH at stake, where they're signing a message on the blockchain saying they support this or that proposal. those people are basically, you know, putting their money where their mouth is, and the other one is actual futures, and futures has a big advantage over a lot of other mechanisms in that you also incorporate people that don't yet currently own BCH, but that might if something was resolved. So there might be a situation, let's say there's one person running an implementation, and someone's view is, well, gee, if Bitcoin Cash didn't have this person running that implementation, I'd love to own some, but I don't own any right now. Or if this wasn't the case, or if this was the case, I'd love to own more BCH. So you incorporate people who have dollars sitting on the sidelines and are potential owners of BCH, rather than with coin voting. It measures something that's very important, which is all the current holders of BCH, but it misses out on those crowd as well. And you also bring in shorters and speculators, which are kind of very useful in determining how things should be. So I think in general, like, voting mechanisms are useful, but the biggest problem with a lot of voting mechanisms is it's basically Sybil attacked. We're dealing with people in China, in the West, in Japan, in a bunch of different countries that speak different languages. So you need mechanisms that are resilient to that, where and the biggest one is greed. You know, people want to make money. So having a mechanism where you can vote and then make money if you're right is great for that.
So I saw Josh has had his hand up for a while, and then Justin and Jonathan. Or sorry, Jonathan and Justin.
Thanks, George. So I think it's important to think about our current situation as we try to figure out where we want to be. And the way that I see our current situation is I said this before, and I think it's still fairly accurate, is I view BCH kind of like a fiefdom, where like each implementation is its own little like fiefdom, and the number of miners that are running that implementation to mine are kind of like the hired mercenaries or the army that they have. And I mean, like, armies are great, but in order to have a fiefdom, you have to have people to support it. And if you end up misrepresenting your people, they're going to leave. And I think that's kind of how I view it currently. And I think that's why the multi-implementation future could be pretty healthy, because it forces us to, like, actually going to war is pretty expensive, as we're seeing right now. Like, it's detrimental to not just the individuals, but also the whole ecosystem. And we're kind of incentivized to not fight all the time. And that's actually, I think, a good thing. And having that kind of diversity is actually something that I think can inspire collaboration more so than it can destruction. And with that, I think it's important to realize that any rules that we create are ultimately not enforceable. You know, like, we can't decide on a rule and then force people to use our cryptocurrency. And I think for that, we need to make sure that we're listening to the most important part of our decision-making process, which is the users themselves. Unfortunately, that's really hard to do because we're fairly anonymous on the blockchain, and you don't know if one address is 500 people or if it's one person. So that's really difficult. And I think ultimately what we need to do is just facilitate the communication between the different mining nodes, thank you, the different mining pools and the nodes that they're using, but also facilitate the communication from the users to the pools themselves. Because I think ultimately they want to represent the market, and I feel like they don't have the information to do so. And I think that is even further complicated by the fact that a lot of the decisions that we as node implementers are making are too hard to digest for the average person. I mean, they're sometimes even too hard for me to digest as a dev. You know what I mean? Like, the stuff that we do is very complicated, and the ramifications are very complicated. So I think that's the situation that we're in. And I think things like the Bitcoin mining parliament that was proposed, I think, is half of the equation, but it's not all of it. And I think that we need to hear what the miners want, but we also need to be able to hear what the users want. So that's all.
Jonathan, you want to go next?
Yeah. quick response to Mark, or like extension of Mark, then I'm going to like respond to Josh's thing. I'm going to change what I was going to say, but yeah, so like coin futures are definitely really interesting, but it's important to keep in mind that coin futures or like futures trading is measuring what people think is going to win, not what people think should win. Futures aren't telling people what the best of several governance options is. They just are guessing what everybody else is guessing. Basically, it's what we call a Keynesian beauty contest. A Keynesian beauty contest is where you're guessing who you think is going to win the beauty contest, not who is actually the most beautiful person in the pageant. And those are interesting and fun games to play, but they have a tendency to do weird things, because as soon as one person or one proposal starts winning, that proposal tends to gain momentum. So I think that it's important to be cautious about putting too much weight into the into the trading futures. But in response to what Josh was saying, yeah, there's a lot of difficulty in understanding the proposals, and it's hard to have even devs be experts on each of the proposals. Often people don't really learn what's really at stake until it's too late. And I think that this is a solvable problem, actually, or at least there's a good way to address this problem using coin voting, but using something that I call liquid coinocracy, which is a variant of liquid democracy. So in representative democracy, you have people voting for people who vote on issues. In direct democracy, you have people voting on issues directly. There's also a third option, or actually a more general option that encompasses both of those, and that's to have people have the option of setting a default vote or a default delegation for their votes, with also the ability to vote on particular issues directly when they learn enough about it to form an opinion. So for example, I could delegate 20% of my vote to Josh Green, 20% to Tom Zander, et cetera. I could delegate part of my vote to each of the devs that I think has an opinion on important technical issues. But then when it comes to an issue like the IFP that I actually understand, I would be able to say, oh yeah, I understand this. I say yes on the IFP because that's what I really believe. No, not really. But it gives me the ability to have my vote be counted in all the situations. And it's counted accurately when I have an actual idea, and it's counted in an interesting and meaningful way, and with a lot of information behind it on the issues that are just too minor or too esoteric for me to learn about specifically. So I think that could solve the issue of esoterica, and also solve the issue of having everybody be represented, and having users be represented rather than just SHA-256 miners or just people who are active enough to care about these kinds of issues. And I'd also like to mention that coin voting has been tried, and for large issues, it seems to actually work quite well. The best example of coin voting that I know is with the ETH DAO hard fork, which turned into the hard fork that created the Ethereum Classic chain. And in that fork, coin voting wasn't used as a governance system. It was used as a polling system, like John was mentioning. It was used as a way to assess what would happen if a hard fork occurred around this issue. And on Carbon Vote, v1.carbonvote.com, I think is the URL, people voted, and about 87% of Ethereum's coins who voted in favor of a hard fork to recover the DAO funds, and 13% voted against it. And
okay, let's let somebody else get in though.
Can I finish one sentence?
Okay, sure.
Yeah. 1 week after the hard fork, the price ratios were 85% to 15%. So very close to what was predicted by Carbon Vote.
That's really interesting. Justin, Javier, and then Kieran, and then Roger. Go ahead, okay. Justin.
So it was mentioned before that BMP alone is maybe not enough to govern or really understand the politics of the protocol. And I do think I have, developed the other half of that equation in the free stage model of governance. The solution has always been there. We just needed to understand it. Now, first to respond to Jonathan more directly, the problem with proof of stake voting over BCH is that there's a lack of participation due to a lack of incentives, because in proof of stake cryptocurrencies, there would be a reward for participating in governance. That's not the case here. And a lot will be locked up on exchanges, and a lot of users might have it in deep cold storage and so forth. So I don't think that alone is a really a practical solution. And you mentioned the carbon vote over Ethereum. The participation on that was actually quite low, also further highlighting the point I'm making there. Now, I also agree with John on the proof of stake and also the futurarchy mentioned by Mark, but more importantly, that these should be primarily used as polling mechanisms, because I do think that they sit outside of at least what I've conceptualized as the free stages of governance. So my theory combines the free stages together, from implementation to mining, which actually fully encompasses BMP. So you could just slot BMP in the mining stage of governance, essentially, and ultimately market or users, if you will, because I think ultimately BCH and Bitcoin is governed by the market, because even if the miners might vote one way, the market as a whole might have a very different idea on what they think is valuable. So I think ultimately it's through the splitting mechanism, it's the market that decides. But the point of having a more thorough theory that encompasses earlier stages of governance is that we don't pull the nuclear trigger every time we have a disagreement, because these disagreements can be resolved on the lower levels before we escalate it to these mechanisms. And I think that's a very important thing to keep in mind. And in terms of the other stages of governance that I've included on top of and underneath BMP, is that it also reflects the reality of governance today. So even if we were to say BMP is now a form of governance, I think politics still occurs on the implementation level, and even if the chain splits, the market might make different decisions. So I think Javier is completely correct in how he structured BMP, but I think it's also important to keep in mind the nuance of these other politics that do occur in cryptocurrency. So
very good.
Yeah,
very good. Okay, Javier.
Hello. Thank you. I respect, obviously, the voting with money, but in my opinion, this is not going to work very well, because low participation, the quorum is going to be very low, in my opinion. I have experience before Bitcoin in voting system. It's like my passion since 2004. I am building voting systems, and I think users don't want to vote every week about very complex software engineers' decision all the time. I think they want the service promising the white paper, fast, cheap transactions worldwide, And at the same time, users really vote by markets in long term. But the problem is markets cannot act in short term. That's why it has power. I think the other problem, my other problem with proof of stake is, proof of stake or voting with money is the same for me. The other problem is the white paper says nothing about that. It's only talking about voting with hash power all the time. And I want to execute the white paper with precision and nothing more, because I think that can work perfect.
All right, very good. So Kieran, then Roger, and then maybe we had a couple new people join. Maybe they'll go. Go ahead, Kieran.
So I think we need to be clear on what we're optimizing for when we're talking about a governance system, if indeed we need a governance system, but I think we do. So number one, I think the current system that we have gives a very low degree of certainty for users. I think that's undesirable. So ideally, a governance system would give us a good degree of certainty. Number two, I think it's unreasonable to expect users to be actively involved in every minute decision that needs to be made. So I think a tiered governance system might be suitable here. Where smaller details can be taken care of by people that are more actively involved, but we have an escalation system in place where we can, if things are starting to look more contentious, or even if there are larger changes. I think Jonathan might have front-run me on a few points there, but yeah, that's just what I'd like to state.
Roger, did you want to get something in? You had your hand up earlier. Sorry.
Yeah, I wanted to say that I'm really curious to hear. We had Derek McGill join, and just a little bit of background. Like, he was absolutely a big blocker from the beginning, and there were a whole faction of big blockers that were kind of driven away by another faction within Bitcoin Cash, and it seems like that's on the verge of happening here again, or that faction's going to be driven away. I feel like we're kind of beating around the bush a little bit today, though, too. Like, the main topic seems to be this 8% block reward diversion to a select set of devs who have decided to do it themselves. So I'd love to hear Derek's input and thoughts as someone who's had kind of one foot in BCH and another foot in BSV, if people are up for that sort of thing. I'd also like to point out that coin vetting has been going on for years, and it was like 90-10, like 90% in favor of big block Bitcoin, and hundreds of millions of dollars worth of Bitcoin voted, and obviously it didn't work out that way at the end.
Well, let's hold off. Let's hold off on Derek yet. Maybe we can hear from him later. Also, Majamalu has joined. Welcome. Because I think there are also a couple people that were that were waiting to join that were not specifically invited, but maybe after we finish the main conversation, they can join. So, Majamalu, do you have any thoughts on what we've discussed so far that you'd like to share? You're muted.
Sorry if
You're good now.
Something. I agree 100% with what Justin Bones said. So I don't think I have much more to say about this, at least for now. Thank you.
Okay, excellent. So I'm going to get back to the questions. So who makes decisions in Bitcoin Cash? Mark, what would your answer be?
Sorry, could you say that again? You cut out on my end for a second.
Sorry, yeah. Here's the question: who in Bitcoin Cash makes decisions, or who makes decisions for Bitcoin Cash?
I think the market. At the end of the day, Bitcoin Cash or any blockchain can be whatever it wants to be, and then the market decides whether or not to buy it or not. So, a coin can become worse or better over time, and in terms of its technical specifications, and then the market can say, "Oh, this is very useful," or not. So I think the miners, there's this illusion that the miners have a lot of power. I think miners have less power than buyers and sellers of the coin, because miners can create any coin, and then people say, "Oh no, that's not as useful." A miner could switch to a fork and divert all their resources to a fork that gave them a bunch of new units of the coin, but no one would buy it. So who cares?
Okay, Eleanor, do you have any thoughts on that? Who makes decisions in Bitcoin Cash?
Right now or in the future? Because I think what we have right now is we see it, right? It's different people, as Justin said, miners, implementations, market, and everybody has a word in that. And right now, I used to like to say that buying a coin is a political statement. So that's how you vote. You vote by buying what you like. You buy something that represents you. You buy something that echoes with you, with your values. And I think a lot of people in BCH are here because we're, politically motivated as well. BCH represents something bigger, and we have hopes in it when we project what BCH should be. But in terms of who makes the decision right now, I think we see it. It's the implementation makes the decision on the future of the protocol right now. And then therefore users and market are sort of out the door because we can't decide. We're blocked. We're not devs. I don't have the knowledge to influence that decision making either. I'm a non-dev, I'm a non-tech person, so why should I even have an opinion, right? There's been a lot of I think a negative feedback, almost like how dare you express yourself if you don't have that technical knowledge. And I think that needs to change. But Jonathan Tumim, you mentioned that users should vote. I think it's an interesting model, but then I agree with Javier on the sense that voting apathy, the quorum wouldn't be high enough, and then who would vote? So then it triggers other questions there as well. So yeah, I look forward to hearing more about what everybody has to say, but thank you already until now for the great conversation. I think we're getting there. And like Roger said, let's also attack the elephant in the room right now and remember why we're having this conversation right now. There's urgency. George, you've been hosting daily live streams for a reason, and now we're going to go to weekly to sort of understand what's going on. And I think right now what we're doing here is fantastic. We need more communication, and a lot of the things that people said is about listening more to the miners as well, even though Mark, you're saying they don't have that much power, it's the market first, but we need to listen more to the miners as well. And I think just having open conversations is needed. I think we sort of got a bit lazy. We sort of trusted the lead implementation to be benevolent, and it's not the case. So it's up to us to make the governance that we want, because in a voluntarist network, we get the governance that we deserve. So I'm sorry before I triggered a bit when I said that, we're a joke, but I see it from other communities out there that are like, oh, governance, we've already figured that out. Decreed has Politeia, Dash has other things going on, Tezos, all these other blockchains out there that have decision-making on-chain decision-making, and we need to do better. We can do better. So either we learn from other projects and we take what we like and we make it our own, or we keep things as they are today, but we improve on our communication and on our community building, basically. And we agree on common set of values and we move forward and we work together.
Right. Good stuff. So Josh Green, then John, then Kieran. Go ahead, Josh.
This is an awesome question. I mean, it truly is a fantastic question. I think the answer will surprise everybody because everybody makes the decision. It's just we make decisions at different phases and at different capabilities, right? Ultimately, again, to my statement earlier, no one has to use a currency that they don't want to use, at least a cryptocurrency. Obviously, fiat currencies don't have that necessarily. But the reality is, if we only had one implementation at the helm right now, and all of the miners supported it, and it was a decision that the users genuinely were against, and they felt that they weren't being represented, then they would leave. And that is the power that users have. They could always leave. And I think really what we're fighting over right now are kind of I would say, apathetic users, which I don't think there are many, but I'm sure there are some. I mean, I'm sure there are plenty, to be perfectly honest, that are exactly to the point that we discussed earlier, that not every user wants to think about the innards of the currency that they're using. That is a very true statement. I mean, people don't have the time. They're doing other things, and the issues that we're facing right now are complicated. So If the issue that we're being divided over is big enough, then the users have the power. But it is really hard for users to unite in a way that actually has impact. So we need to have more competition at different levels. And we need to have that competition for multi-node mining in order to better represent the people. And furthermore, too, I think the issue that we've learned about, the SegWit 2x and our current situation is the type of fork that is proposed ultimately forces the hand on who has power. Because if this was a hard fork, then the users have more power. They get to, assuming both sides are represented, they get to decide who they move to. But ultimately, with a soft fork, if their side isn't represented and their chain doesn't exist, then they don't have anywhere else to go other than leaving. So this is, in my opinion, more of like a hostile attack than it is an opportunity for the community to really like get what they wanted and feel represented.
Right. Kieran, I think you're next. Oh, no, sorry. John, you're next. And then Kieran. My apologies.
Yeah, I also think this is a fantastic question. And I think you have to step back a little bit to answer it. So what the guys were saying just before me is I agree with it. The market decides. What Eleanor said, the users and the miners, we need to listen to everybody. But I think it's really, really important to step back and understand ultimately the market decides, like Mark said. But that's way too late. Like, right, by the time that kind of thing is happening and some serious decision is being made by the market, things have gone bad, and Eleanor is going to be calling it a joke at that point. So we need to be making decisions earlier in the process, right? So the market, it's too late. But what the market likes about Bitcoin Cash and what's unique about us is the permissionless and censorship resistant, our large network effect. Those kind of things, fast and cheap are nice, but they're never going to win the day. Those are just necessary, but not enough. Permissionless, censorship resistance, the network effect is what we have to maintain. And the miners make the decisions on that. But again, that's too late. When they're making a decision, it's way too late in the process. By the time that they have made a contentious decision, we've already lost network effect, right? We've had users lose confidence. We've had businesses decide, I don't know if this is for me. I might, do something else. They hedge their bets. Users jump off, just so they don't get shot. So we have to keep stepping it back, right? Make sure that there's low conflict and predictability much earlier in the process. And that comes down to the information sharing. Because the answer to it, who makes decisions, is in a permissionless system, everybody makes decisions, like Josh said, right? But we can't have a coercive voting or a coercive dictator or whatever. As soon as we have that, we're bypassing proof of work. And that's not what the market wants. And like Eleanor said, it's a political thing also. It's not what we want. I'm going to say we. I'm just going to say it. So yeah, stepping everything back, making sure information and collaboration happens much earlier is the process that we need to solve, because the answer is everybody decides. That's really the only answer to that question.
Kieran, you want to go? And then Javier?
Looks like I've been front run again on a couple of points, but I definitely agree with John on, I think miners and market to an even greater extent are reactionary decision-making processes. So reactionary decision-making is not great for certainty, and I think it causes a great deal of disruption, and we lose a lot of ground whenever we need to resort to those processes. I think it's important that we have them in place, but I don't think it's our frontline decision-making process. So really, what we're trying to decide here is, what are we actually putting out for the market to decide on? And I think I also agree with Josh Green that everyone's making decisions, of course, at various different levels. And that SOC folks are coercive and don't actually leave room for decision-making processes at the later stages. So I disagree that we should have soft forks and we should have hard forks if it comes to the point where we need to.
Okay, very good. So I think what we're going to do, I'm going to let Javier make his comment, and then we'll probably do a wrap-up round. And then once the main program is completed, we'll, whoever wants to stick around or join, we'll have more free-form conversation. Javier?
My theory is, not my theory, my understanding of the white paper is users by markets are the absolute power in long term, and miners are the executive power in short term. Basically, because the markets cannot act in the blockchain. In the opposite, miners can act in seconds, can make hash war, can make reorg, can make empty blocks, and many other things if they want to act in a coordinated way. And that vision is very simple. Is basically the result is miners prevent developers from doing crazy things, and at the same time, markets prevent miners doing crazy things. I think that is simple, and that is the white paper and can work very well. Thank you.
All right, very nice. So I'm just sorry, Jonathan. We're approaching an hour, so I just want to do one final question. Everybody can give me like 5 to 10 words, and then we'll move into the free form segment. And Jonathan, you can be first up in that. So the question, please, 10 words or less, 15 seconds or less. And I'm just going to go around the board. What do you foresee for Bitcoin Cash after November 15th? John?
Yo, so yeah, this is a great one. We have so much energy coming back. We're just going to keep building, including governance. So it's going to be great.
All right. Colin?
I'm actually very hopeful for the future of Bitcoin Cash. I think this proves that the project is decentralized. So I think we can continue to build from here.
All right. Eleanor?
I'm going to say community, resilience, communication, and hope. My 4 words.
Very nice. Josh?
Better communication, more innovation, and multiple mining node implementations.
Awesome. Jonathan?
Permissionless innovation.
Amen. Mark?
Less uncertainty, more peace, more building.
Oh, yes. Thank you. Justin?
With the removal of ABC and a toxic development culture, BCH will be unleashed with a strain of new developments.
Unstoppable. Majamalu?
I think secession, I love secession, but it doesn't work in money. We need the network effect. You don't add to the network effect by splitting the network. So I hope we end up with just all united, or at least one branch almost dead.
1000%. Kieran?
I think it's going to be a setback, but a temporary one. And I think Bitcoin Cash is going to continue to be permissionless, peer-to-peer electronic cash for the world.
All right. Roger? I'm not hearing you. Okay, we'll come back to you. Javier?
If one person can fracture or capture a blockchain, we are losing our time, all of you. So I want no split and stick together.
Fernando?
Sorry, guys. Yes, the same as Javier. I want no splits and no more dictatorships.
All right. And Christian, did you want to get an answer in? I'm not sure if Christian was.
Yes.
There we go.
Yeah, I'm really optimistic about Bitcoin Cash, and I'm going to continue contributing no matter the outcome in November.
All right. Okay. Well, I think that's going to wrap up our first hour. And now we can move into a more, unless Roger, your mic is working now. But I think we'll move into a more informal format for as long as you guys want to go. Maybe another 15, 20 minutes, I think. Derek was on here earlier, and I think during this informal segment, it'll be okay to hear from him. But I think he's left, so if he wants to come back, this would be a good time. So, Jonathan, go for it.
I'm gonna head off, guys. It's pretty late in Hong Kong. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks for joining us, Mark, and yes, thanks everyone for joining this conversation. Thank you so much.
See you, Mark.
So
Thank you for gathering all of us, George, as well.
Jonathan, go ahead.
Yeah. So I think a lot of the issue that we've been running into recently with governance has been transaction costs. It's been difficult and expensive for us to get input from users when the main method for users to weigh in is by voting with their money after a fork has happened or on, in best case, futures. And the result of that, and also like there's a transaction cost for miners. Miners rarely vote. They do so only in emergency situations like we have right now. And even then, not all of them vote. We don't get perfect signaling. We get right now like 55% saying yes, we're going with BCHN, and the others are saying basically nothing. And that's, I think, the result of transaction costs. And because of those transaction costs, what we're seeing is that the main decision-making party is the devs. And I think that that is something that Bitcoin ABC recognized. They saw that they had a lot of power, default power, because of the transaction costs for any other party being involved, and they decided to exploit that. So I think that really what we need to be doing is figuring out ways for us to reduce the transaction costs for especially users to be participants in the system. And a lot of people were saying that like coin voting doesn't work or isn't going to work very well because of low participation. And that's exactly why I'm proposing the liquid method, the liquid coinocracy method, in which everybody only has to vote once, like ever, if they want to do it that way. They can just delegate their votes at the start. And as long as the person or people that they delegate to are reasonable and don't switch sides and don't do silly things, they don't have to interact on those weekly or daily or monthly issues or even yearly issues. They can only interact on the decade level issues. So, and then like the other thing I think is just making the UX, making the user experience for voting and weighing in and doing the delegation as seamless as possible. I think with those two things, we can probably get not 100% participation, but maybe 20% participation in one of these schemes. And I think that that would make a huge difference in disempowering the over-empowered devs and preventing rogue developers from trying to leverage their power for financial gain. And I think it would also, like miners don't like weighing in specifically because they don't like making decisions for everybody else. We saw this during the big block, the block size wars of like 2015, 2016. The miners did actually support the big block position. They just didn't want to be making that decision for everybody. And so, yeah, anyway, I'm going to stop there and let you guys respond.
Looks like Josh, you have your hand up.
Yeah, thanks. And so I think the real quick, Jonathan, do you want or envision like users voting or users being polled?
I strongly prefer starting with polling systems and testing them out and seeing how well they work. And I mean, I think that like polling itself is a governance system. Like when people know what everybody else believes, then it usually becomes trivial to decide what the outcome should be.
Sure. Yeah, thanks.
Yeah.
I appreciate that. I mean, I think that's my stance too, is like the polling is probably the right path ahead, because voting usually means that at the end of that vote, there is some sort of coercive result for the person that, you know, didn't win the vote, right? And I mean, like, enforcing that rule is going to be really hard, because like the incentive to game that system just gets so much higher. I mean, like it's incentive, your incentive to game it even for polling, but like I think ultimately what I'm seeing is I kind of think that the miners are the ones ultimately voting, because they're the ones that have to make a decision because they have to be mining something. And I think their current, like the incentive that we have that's nice, and to the point you were making, was like miners don't want to be making the decision for other people. And I think I'm not really sure if it's because they're altruistic. I think it's more so they just don't want to guess wrong. And I think that there are a lot of politics at play. And I like that's unfortunate from some components, but it's also kind of nice, because it's nice that they're in check and not able to just do crazy whatever the hell they want whenever they want. It's nice that they have some semblance of consequence. But in the same time, I think we are not giving them the tools to make an informed decision, because the only people that they talk to, and you know this, are like the devs that reach out to them. You know, like it is so hard to reach out to the pools and to the miners themselves, because there are, you know, they're distributed all over the place, but they're also in different countries. There's language barriers, and it's really hard to convince them to do anything. So communicating with them is basically whoever has the best communication has the most power. And the reality is, like, the only people that are communicating with them are like if you look at it as broken as the American system is right now, right? It's like the lobbyists. The lobbyists are the only ones communicating with the representatives, and there's no like actual representation happening there, or at least, I mean, there is from your own perspective, but it's, you know, there's incentive for having that be flawed. So I think a polling system would be awesome, and I think John, actually, I don't know if his hand's up, so hopefully he's going to talk about this next. But like getting a way for users to actually communicate in a way that miners see it, I think would be a huge first step.
John, and then Kieran, and then Justin, and then Majimagu.
Yeah, I'll try to be quick. So I just wanted to follow up a little bit on what both Jonathan and Josh are saying here. But first, about the developers having too much power. Sometimes there's an ugly narrative out there, you know, like devs are bad, you shouldn't trust devs or something like that. But I think we should really look at it from what's actually happened, right? For the history of Bitcoin, the reason devs are making decisions is because they were the ones who invested the time and resources into these hard decisions. And other people have too, right? The onboarders and people who are out there trying to get people to use the coin. But I think it's, you know, we shouldn't demonize devs. It's really a curse. Power is a curse, right? And you don't want that curse to fall on your head, right? I don't think Omri started off with whatever intention of causing problems. Maybe that's how we see it right now, ABC. I think it's important for us to think, right, that we don't ever want that power, that curse to fall on any one group. So yeah, we have to avoid that and not demonize people, right? We just need to figure out how to make it actually work. And then the point about you know, polling versus voting, I'm just going to reiterate, like Josh said, that I think it's not just a good idea. I think it's 100% necessary for us to avoid coercive voting, or dictators, or parliaments, or Bitcoin miner parliament is kind of a misnomer. It's more like Bitcoin miners polling, right? The P could change meaning there. It's not actually enforced, right? So the Bitcoin miners parliament is not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about a Congress or a parliament that makes laws and everybody has to follow them. And the reason that's so important is because, like I said before, once you start to do that, you are bypassing proof of work. And once we start to bypass proof of work, we are something very different than what we started with. We're something very different than what we have today. And that's not our project. So we have to retain those properties that make us a number 3, one of the biggest coins in the world and valued by the market. And the permissionless participation only works because proof of work is distributed, right? Because the miners wouldn't be able to agree on who to kick off the network or who to censor, because somebody's going to include that transaction. So it's very important to keep that proof of work there and keep it uncorrupted while we figure out how to do information sharing. And like Jonathan Tumim said, come to agreements without having to coerce anybody, because once it becomes obvious what everybody thinks and what the good solutions are, things converge pretty quickly. So yeah, so let's make sure to keep that kind of not optional, I think.
Kieran?
Well, just on the voting side, right? So the largest system with, I guess, closest governance system to liquid democracy is EOS. And just an observation there, the majority of the voting or the delegation was done by exchanges. So that's definitely something to keep in mind if we are going to go down the liquid democracy route.
All right, Justin, then Majamalu, then Jonathan.
Can I just quickly respond directly to that?
All right, if it's 30 seconds or less.
10 seconds. Yeah, so Carbon Vote did actually address that, and it's fairly easy to just identify the addresses of exchanges and have a view of the vote that excludes them.
Okay, Justin?
Okay. So the thing about polling is that it still requires decision makers to act on that polling. So we need to cover all of the different stages of decision making in order to have a coherent and working system. The point that John made earlier was excellent in regards to not escalating decision making to proof of work and the market every time, because that would be far too destructive for the progress of BCH in a competitive sense in the greater cryptocurrency market. The free stage model of government that I've developed achieves that by covering the reality of all of the earlier stages of governance that actually occur before it reaches that point. So I think it's also really important to acknowledge that, and the point around polling helping to improve the decision makers that are in those positions, such as implementations and mining pools. Taking feedback from having more robust polling systems makes perfect sense, but we still need to keep in mind that effectively the polling is not deciding on the protocol. We have these mechanisms in place that have been functioning over and dysfunctioning over Bitcoin for many years, but I think the bridge that we need to cross is actually having a better understanding of these things, and then potentially it could actually function the way we want it to function. I agree with Kieran as well that a multi-tier governance mechanism is what BCH needs. And again, that's what the free stage model achieves as well, combined with BMP being the second stage of that governance. I also agree with Josh that soft forks are actually a subversive mechanism within the context of that theory, because it also bypasses and makes it more difficult for rebellion. We really should be supporting people trying to split off. So, to take a book from Ethereum, when the ETC split happened, they were incredibly supportive and even built in support in wallets. And, that's what I would call supreme confidence. We don't need to be threatened by something that actually isn't that threatening. And there was a question earlier on, I think, who decides? And I think I cover that, in my theory pretty well, from the implementations to the miners to the market being the three stages of government. But there's many parties and minor parties involved that collectively feed back into each other. And that's what effectively forms the collective governance that is known as Bitcoin. And if we can increase our understanding and thereby make the system function better, you know, we really have a shot at this particular split being a game changer in terms of how it might transform and polarize the culture and having a more vested interest in a multi-implementation ecosystem.
Right. Majamalu.
Yeah, I want to focus just for a minute in the incentives, something some people mentioned. I think it's important to not forget we are aiming for peer-to-peer electronic cash system for the world. So we cannot ask the users to vote on anything. We have to provide a good service, and that's it. If we ask the users one question more, we probably lose them because they have alternatives. I don't like that idea for that reason. I mean, we will have less and less and less users that are aware of all the things we are talking now. Incentives of miners. Miners are incentivized or not to do the right thing. If they are not incentivized to do the right thing, we have to go home. I mean, this is a failure. I think they are, but they are learning. There's a learning curve. So perhaps they learn from past mistakes. I don't know. What we can do is not deciding who will decide. It's deciding to raise awareness about the mechanism that is already there, that is the script that Satoshi described in the white paper. So the miners, like it or not, they decide. They have the power to decide. If they will use it in the right way, even if they don't use it the way we like it every time, at least we know there's a mechanism. And we all agree that that is a mechanism. So I think we should remember that they have the gun. Let's say they don't have to use it necessarily. They can show it, and that's enough. I can use it. This is what I will decide in the future, and then we can all. Let's say accommodate to that. That's important because we are building a kind of money here. So we need to be predictable. That's why I like the BMP idea.
Right. I think we'll do Josh, Javier, and John, and then Jonathan.
Thanks. Mine's really quick, actually. And it's a question for Javier because it basically leads into it. So I read as much as I could on the BMP before coming here today. I haven't, to my knowledge, and this is my understanding, and I would like you to correct my understanding or confirm it. Basically, it looks like it's a mechanism for mining pools and mining pools in general to communicate with one another and with the blockchain in general. So this is like basically a way for users to collect the opinions of miners and also to garner feedback from one another. Because if I understand correctly, the way it works is if you've mined a block within the last I forget how many, then that entitles you to have an opinion on the BMP. I don't see anything enforcing it from there. I think it's like a communication mechanism where they have to commit to something on the blockchain. But is that the extent of it, or am I missing?
Do you want to jump in, Javier?
I understand the 80% that you say. Sorry, I try to answer your question. The BMP listen the blocks is completely on-chain, decentralized, like memo.cash is similar. The difference is BMP can calculate the proportional hash power of every participant, of every address. And in this way, at the address with a opt-return protocol, the participants, then it's not only a pool thing. Not only pools can participate in the BMP, every miner. This mechanism allows to delegate hash power in any address. in this way, and in my opinion, it's not my hash power. It's not my decision. But BNP allows to miners to delegate a arbitrary percentage of hash power in any address, in developers, in researchers, or other people to make the voting and vote and talk with hash power. Por favor, George, me habré saltado alguna parte de lo que ha preguntado. ¿Me lo puedes repetir, por favor?
Pues yo creo que la pregunta de él es si es simplemente poder señalizar algo por ahí o si es algo más.
Okay. This is a very good question. Today, the BNP is only a pre-consensus signal, like today Coinbase signal is the same thing, but the BNP is totally on-chain. The database completely is the Bitcoin Cash blockchain. Then, in the same way that my code can calculate the hash power of the result of a voting, in the same way, for example, BCH node can calculate the same. And if we can, in the future, we can establish predefined parameters. And in this way, the BNP protocol can have the capacity to establish, to set parameters with consensus. I think the limit is not the technical problem. I think the limit is the political problem.
I agree with you.
Right, John?
Yes. Hey, it's 3:30 for me, so I'm going to jump off. But I wanted to just say something before I go. Back in January, and I'm sure many times in Bitcoin's history, we face some problems, right? And every time the problems are bigger and harder and crazier. So that's fine. That's to be expected, right? We're trying to be global money for everybody. But when we have a problem, like back in January, in this kind of situation we're in, we didn't just talk about it. We took to the market, right? We created substitute goods. So BCHN was established, right, as a substitute good. Flipstarter, we established Flipstarter as a substitute good, right? Like, is it really not possible to do funding? Maybe it is. Let's see if we can do it. And I hope, and I kind of challenge everyone here to take the next step and actually create a substitute good. Don't just talk about it. Get out there, find a way, collaborate with people, and let's come up with actual concrete ways to do this, to achieve this maintenance of proof of work, not corrupting proof of work, but also figuring things out much earlier in the process so that the market can have, we can have peace and certainty about things without having to coerce people or do anything that breaks proof of work. So I challenge everybody to do that. And, just another step of Bitcoin Cash making history. We're about to do it again. So I challenge everybody to do that. Go out and make a good timeline for this reality. Yeah. All right. Take care, everybody. It was nice to talk with you all.
Thanks, John. All right. So I think we'll do Jonathan, Kieran, and then we'll probably wrap it up. Oh, you're muted, Jonathan. There you go.
Yeah, unfortunate that John just left. I think the thing with proof of work is that every hard fork subverts and bypasses proof of work. I think that one of the issues with the white paper is that the white paper was written without any idea that there would be a multi-coin scenario, or that there would be the potential for a hard fork, or that there would be the potential for exchanges or users to be choosing by switching between chains. That just wasn't something that Satoshi had considered. And ultimately, that is the decision-making system that the system of last resort. That is what finally makes all decisions, and everything else is just a way of making smaller decisions when it doesn't come down to forking, when it doesn't come down to that last-ditch method. And so, yeah, I think this is one of the reasons why we can't overly rely on miners, because, yeah, the white paper says that miners can vote on any decision-making, any rule-making need that the white paper knows about, which excludes all of those hard forking mechanisms, which are the majority of what BCH is even doing these days. So I think what we really need to be doing is to be going not to the miners, but to the users and trying to get information from them on what they would do in case of a hard fork or in case of a chain split, and trying to take that information and bring it forward from what would happen into an earlier stage in the process in order to guide decision making. And I think the other big thing that we need to be careful about is the fact that power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. And we saw that happen with the dev meritocracy, with ABC decides, with the dictatorship, as after a year or 2 years or 3 years of that, ABC started thinking about ways in which they could leverage their developer power into money. They were starting to talk about the what became the IFP in 2018, and they only decided to do it as a UASF 51% attack this last few months, but this has been percolating in their mind for a long time. And I think that if we had any kind of system in which we entrusted a lot of power to a small entity, like a miner, for example, miners are, 5 people or 3 people around the world that control a few thousand% of BCH's hash rate. If we had any kind of concentration of power like that, it would eventually get abused. And so we need to have a system that distributes power amongst a lot of people who are stakeholders in the system, and then reduces the friction for them participating in those decisions. And I do think that, like, the futures market idea has that principle. It gives an incentive for people to participate. Unfortunately, it's just technically hard to make it work without running into that Keynesian beauty contest problem. And it's also hard to define it in a way unless there's a well-defined fork that's expected to actually happen. You can't really do a futures market for 2 futures that are hypothetical and not actually going to happen, because there's no way of evaluating whether the prediction was actually correct.
Okay, Kieran, Josh, and then, Justin. Okay, all right, we'll keep going. Yeah, so go ahead, Kieran. Kieran, Josh, Justin, and then Nelly.
I've actually just got a question for Josh. Right up stage governance process? If so, can you drop us a link?
Can you repeat the question? There was some internet squabbling.
Oh, do you have a write-up on the multi-stage decision-making process? If so, can you drop us a link?
So my proposal is liquid coinocracy, which is really just one stage, but it's hopefully a stage that can go the entire thing. I haven't written up a full post on it. I have made some comments on Reddit. That's about it. I could drag those up, but ultimately I do need to write up the full proposal. And I hope to have that done within like 2 weeks.
All right, Josh.
I was,
sorry,
I was asking Justin. Sorry.
Oh, that makes more sense. But yeah,
I'm also I'm interested to hear more about liquid democracy though myself.
So since that question was directed at me, actually, what I was just actually going to mention. I think I'll be working on the paper for a few more years, but I felt it was wrong to not release it to the public. So I'll be releasing it tomorrow, to the public, and including a Medium article, which is the first revision, and a Google document, essentially open sourcing it so everyone can help contribute to the effort. And I do think that I have solved part of the problem, or at least my best attempt at solving the problem in regards to the earlier stages of governance before we get to the point of the fork, essentially. Combining different stages and groups of decision making to create a type of checks and balances on each other. And in regards to what John said as well before he left, that is my contribution, actually doing something to make it happen. That's according to my specialization within BCH. So yeah, I'm excited to release the free stage model on governance tomorrow, and I would love to have all of your feedback on it as well and make the second version even better.
Josh?
Thanks. My question is actually for Justin, and it's a lead up to something else too. But so you've mentioned before, Justin, that you think that a hard fork is like the nuclear option. I think personally, the nuclear option is like users abandoning the chain. That I think is like the nuclear option, but I still think it's a very valid concern, especially with the forks, because they lead to a lot of uncertainty and they damage the network. They damage the network effect. So I guess what I would like to hear is what your perspective is on why a hard fork, or the Nakamoto consensus thing. Why that is so damaging from your perspective, and if it's not what I just listed.
Right. Well, I think sometimes the nuclear option is necessary, unfortunately, and sometimes I think a split will occur, and there's nothing we can do to stop it, and that's a good thing, because that really ensures the freedom of its participants. But the question is, why is it so bad? So, and I think this is really a question of measure. So I've used the principle that I'm referring to as the Goldilocks zone of blockchain governance. And what I mean by that is that, a blockchain shouldn't be too easy to disrupt or change, but also not too hard to disrupt or change. And that's where it comes into, the incentives and these mechanisms. And to answer your question, directly, why is it bad if a chain continues splitting and, over every small decision, or every, if there's a 6 months power struggle every year, why is that a bad thing? Well, because we're effectively splitting the community, and we're creating a hostile environment. We're creating a lot of drama, and that's just not competitive in this current cryptocurrency market. We're up against some really strong competition, and other cryptocurrencies that are not having these governance problems, in some cases just due to a lack of scale, or just because they're not up, they haven't reached those problems yet, or in some cases because they have different governance mechanisms where, this might be avoided or not. These are all still running experiments. But I think a chain splitting too much is, in the end, very uncompetitive in the market, because it creates a lot of negative press. You have both sides attacking each other, which makes both sides look bad, by the way, even if one side is in the right and the other one's in the wrong. So I think all this type of toxicity and the amount of energy it actually takes away from people that could be focusing on actually building positive things, that's something, you want to avoid, even though I'm interested in doing politics, but it's because I really don't like politics is why I do politics, is we want to have as little politics as we can. But I'm here to say that some politics is definitely required in order to make this happen on all of the stages of governance. It's just part of human nature.
Yeah, no, thank you for that. I think that's you hit it on the money a lot, especially just the pure energy drain from the infighting. How much of my time as a developer has been put towards this stupid November thing compared to working on actual productive things. It's vastly disproportionate. And it's exhausting emotionally and also cognitively. I think the thoughts and the concerns around forking are very valid. Like, we don't want to necessarily be splitting the community every single time, and we don't want to be leading up to this like infighting every single time there's a small disagreement. I posed this question to a couple of people in private a while ago, but like the question was basically like, how many more decisions that are like this do we actually envision? You know, how many more contentious concepts do we really think BCH is going to have to go through in order to be, you know, scaled peer-to-peer electronic cash? And I think generally of the people I've talked to, it seems like we're hoping it's like less than 5, right? Like we're really hoping that we're really getting towards the end of all of the crap that is making people just exhausted, and we're finally going to end up at this goal. And I mean, I think that's like, you know, of course there's always going to be something else. Like there's always going to be some new thing that's going to cause some sort of drama. But I think it's going to calm down, or at least I hope it really calms down for the larger decisions that are causing these splits. And I'm hoping that, I mean, and from my perspective, like I think a lot of the decisions, as long as they're well-intentioned, like there's a lot of different perspectives on how to scale. And I think those differences of opinions, if looked at from a technical level, don't lead to like the toxicity, so to say, like that we're experiencing now. They're not philosophical debates, they're like technical theories. And there may be some ego behind them because everybody likes their own idea the most, generally speaking. But ultimately, you know, everyone's goal is still the same. So we're not out there to like hate on one another, and we're not there to like hope the other person fails. If we're actually looking towards scaling, then we hope that somebody's right. Like that's ultimately what we want, right? We just want one person to be right so that we can have the goal that we've been working so hard on for so long. So I hope that a lot of the decisions that we have to make like this going forward are significantly less awful. But I also hope that when there are like these weird technical decisions that we have to make as an ecosystem, if we do end up having to rely on Nakamoto consensus, that we can rely on it in a way that doesn't split the community like this every single time. And I think there's a way for us to do that with a little bit of like the block template validation service that I have semi-planned. It's not perfect, obviously, because if it relies on wallets, like the wallets still have to make a decision and some other stuff. And but I hope like the communication just gets better over time with the multiple development teams and the miners. And I kind of hope that, I think it was you that said like there's a learning curve with the miners. And I'm optimistic that we're going to get there. But yeah, that's all.
All right, so we're about 100 minutes in, so I'm going to give the last word to Eleanor.
Why? Why am I supposed to do the wrap up of all of this?
No, just the last word, not a wrap up. But you had your hand up earlier, so.
Yeah, no, but I had the hand up earlier, and it's not for the wrap up. But it's like we're talking about the future. They're saying like, who are we thinking is going to win, or who is the most beautiful person, right? And I think we're all here because we have an idea of what BCH should look like. You know, we know what this winning contestant should look like. And we just have to find a way to stay true to our values and to what this beauty contest is about in a way. And why there's no community split, I think, on this fork, like we've seen in the past, is because she's so ugly. Like the other contestant is just so ugly, and she's just so out of the frame of reference that we think is beautiful, with a private thingy on top of it. We really don't like it. So we're unified and saying she's not going to win this, or we're saying she, but this implementation is not going to win. And I just want to thank everybody tonight for just taking their time, you know, volunteering, not volunteering, being paid, not being paid in this space, reminding people that we're here for peer-to-peer electronic cash. And I am hopeful after seeing tonight, after seeing what everything that BCHN has done, stepping up for what is right. And I know, Justin, you say that, you know, it doesn't look good from the outside right now. We're throwing toxicity at each other. But I think for this fork is actually really interesting. And it says so much about the people that are here fighting for the best beauty contestants. This metaphor is going to get old really fast, but Yeah, thank you for everybody for being here, and I look forward to the next. How many days do we have to, George, until the upgrade now?
64.
All right, 64 days to go. Ticking time, and let's do more of these live streams. Let's talk more to each other. Let's make sure that we all stay on the same page and that we know what's happening. So, thank you.
100%. Okay, well, thanks everybody. I think it's been a great conversation, and although the live streaming failed for some unknown reason, Zoom is recording it, and I'll upload it as soon as I can. Let's keep building Bitcoin Cash.
To thank George.
Thank you, George.
All right,
Yeah.
thank you, Larry.
Setting it up.
Bye, everybody.
Thanks
Have
for
a great
the-
weekend.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.